So Nick and I will turn our videos off. Kim will get our video cameras off, and then Kim will get our video started, and we'll see you back here in about 11 to 12 minutes or so. So Kim, take it away.
My name's Nick Griffin. I am a forester with the Harris County Flood Control District. I am responsible for the district's tree planting and maintenance program. Every single year across Harris County on our bayous, our channels, and our detention basins, we plant between 12 to 15,000 trees. Over the past 20 years, we've planted over 300,000 trees across Harris County on over 1,400 acres. We plant native species to southeast Texas. We source those through a contract. We've planted in the past over 50 different species, but we have about 20 species that we plant most frequently on a site. This channel here is a planting that we did in 2012, so it's about 9 years old. It is a mix of native species planted on the slope here. We design our plantings along channels to not only benefit the channel and water quality, but to also not get in the way of our maintenance operations or in the way of normal flows of water along the channel. So these trees are more on the upper part of the slope. It's a mix of trees. Our goal with our planting program is to produce forested shade canopy in these areas that we plant on the slope of the channel, as well as areas we plant in detention basins here. We plant roughly between 200 to 300 trees per acre on our sites, so kind of a medium density, roughly a 15-foot spacing on these trees. As the trees continue to grow up, and what you might be able to see in the background is they produce a shade area that starts to slow the growth of some of the grasses and some of the faster growing weed species that we have along the channel. Ultimately, as these areas grow up, we're able to reduce our mowing underneath the area and eventually eliminate mowing altogether within these forested areas. A lot of people aren't aware that the Flood Control District even plants trees, but we do. We do for multiple reasons. Like I said before, we plant a diverse amount of species as well. We find that if you plant diversity on a site, you have better odds of overall success in the forested area. Some species tend to do better on some sites and other species do better on other sites. So we take a kind of a mixed approach with that and try to plant as many things as possible. And increasing the diversity of planting on the site, you're also going to increase diversity with your bird species and your wildlife habitat on the site as well. A couple of species we have right here that are in the super tree list are sweet gum and loblolly pine. Both of these tend to form in the same forested areas naturally, so it's both species we use quite regularly on the northwest side of town here, where we're in more of the piney woods part of Houston. This is another commonly planted species on Flood Control District right-of-way. This is a water oak. It's actually the most common oak species in southeast Texas. It's a fast-growing oak. It provides a nice shade canopy. Another benefit that we have when we produce forest canopy on a site is the interception of rainwater, which leads to a reduction in stormwater runoff. So that's going to reduce erosion, and it's going to reduce peak flows along our channels as we get rainfall events. This is another species we plant quite frequently. It's a red maple. It does well on the north side of Harris County. It also does well in southern Harris County. One of the native maple species we have in the area. The Flood Control District plants trees, and we also plant grasses, native grasses, and wildflowers, and each of those allow for better absorption of rainwater into the soil. You have more of a natural system occurring when you have green surfaces on our properties. So that's one of our objectives, is to try to maximize that storage capacity of water, the utilization of water, to prevent as much runoff as we can. With this basin in particular, it was planted in 2007, so it's about 14 years old. We've seen a very rapid establishment of trees on this site. It's one of the things that's taken us a little bit by surprise, is how quickly we can get to that point of canopy closure. Most of our sites, it's an average of 10 to 15 years to achieve that objective of canopy closure. We have very large trees on site. We're seeing a lot of shading on the site. These trees, in addition to growing and shading and reducing our mowing costs, the larger the canopies become, the more benefits we realize. So we have higher amounts of storm water reduction through interception of the rainfall in the canopy. The tree canopies as well reduce the impact of rainfall onto a bare site. So if you have rainfall on a bare soil, the impact of that rainfall is going to be greater than if it's falling through a canopy and that velocity is slowed down. So we have a less sediment and less erosion on sites like this where we have trees established. This is another tree that we plant relatively frequently. This is a willow oak. It's another species similar to water oak, and it's on the super tree list. It's planted in our detention basin here in Northwest Harris County in the Cypress Creek watershed. There's some other super trees that we've planted in the area in this detention basin as well. There was some initial concern about planting within detention basins, but we've run some modeling and some calculations on what the impact of trees are on the volume of a detention basin, and it's actually relatively small, less than 2% a change in the volume of the capacity of the detention basin for a mature tree planted at a very, very high density. The modeling that we ran was at a much higher density than we would normally plant, and trees a much larger diameter size than we normally would have on a detention basin. So with that, we're able to plant in a lot of areas in Harris County and achieve that canopy effect that we're looking to achieve and improve and have all of the benefits that the trees provide to us. This is a tree that we plant really commonly in our detention basins and channels. This is an American sycamore. It's a fast-growing species with a larger leaf. It does well on a variety of sites, including sites that stay a little bit wet. It's a really great riparian species, and it really does provide that shade canopy that we're looking for. So we don't only just plant the fastest growing and the largest trees, we plant a wide variety. We have several different species of oak out here that are slower growing, but they have a greater longevity. So we're always looking to have a diverse site, a diverse amount of planting, a diverse size mix of species too. Sycamores get to be a very large tree, but we have other trees like elm trees that tend to be a little bit smaller. River birches tend to be smaller. So we plant a wide variety not only of species, but sizes, age classes, and just trying to realize different benefits that each of them provide on a site. So right now we're under the canopy of a grove of green ash. Green ash is another common riparian species that we utilize at the flood control district. You can really see the diameter that these have produced as they've grown over the years, and also the lack of vegetation underneath this canopy here. So this is an area that we don't need to mow any longer. It's a forest soil type here now that isn't supportive of those fast growing grasses that we have to mow on a frequent basis. A benefit that's also provided with this tree planting and shade canopy is the reduction of heat islands. And so within our properties where we have tree canopies, you do realize lower temperatures. You can feel it as you're standing underneath the canopy here. So it's an additional benefit that may not be a direct flood control benefit, but it's a benefit for the community at large. This is another species that's on the super tree list that we plant in some locations. That is a live oak. This tree in particular was spaded into this location. So we do have a tree spading program where we move larger trees in select areas to supplement our plantings. In addition to the spaded trees that we have along this site, we also did our typical tree planting, which is using 3-gallon containerized material. We have all of our native species planted along this forested buffer here to kind of bolster the species richness in this area and to create a bit of a larger buffer on the top here. We're going to come back this next winter and plant additional trees on the slopes of the channel. So this is the typical size of the trees that we plant in a 3 to 5 gallon container. They usually measure 5 to 6 feet tall. This is an American elm. It's one that we use commonly. It's a native species to the area that grows relatively quickly. It's very adaptable to a lot of sites. We use this species across Harris County. This tree right here is a river birch. We plant this this mostly on the north side of Harris County. It likes sandy soils. This is an excellent riparian species. It has a very robust root system that helps anchor the soil in place on slope plantings, and it's a native that we use in pretty good numbers. As the trees get larger, they provide more benefits to us. Benefits with water quality, erosion control, air quality, and other things that the trees provide.
Awesome. Thank you. I see about 35 more folks have come in during the video. So let me just mention one more time that if you wanted to see the whole video and you came in perhaps in the middle of it, it will be posted in the next few days on the Houston Wilderness website. Click under programs and then 4.6 million trees, and it'll be right there. Thanks again, Nick. That's a really fun video with lots of really good information, and it's just amazing what all the flood control district is doing on tree planting. Let me go ahead and kick off the Q&A, and we've already got questions. I'm going to get started on those, but if you all have other ones, let me know. There were a couple things in the video I thought I might mention. One is Nick talks about super trees. If you want more information on what has been coined kind of the 14 top super trees in the region because of their high ecosystem services abilities, you can find that on the Houston Wilderness website. Click on programs and Port of Houston Trees program, and on that web page is information on the super trees as well as information on almost all of our native tree species and their various levels of ecosystem services. So real fun information there. Another point is you mentioned spaded trees, and I have gotten a question about what a spaded tree is. So you want to kind of start, we'll start off with that one, Nick.
Sure. Tree spading is the operation of moving large trees on a site. And so we use that in limited cases where we can actually move trees either out of the way of future construction or move trees onto a site post-construction where we need to try to get kind of an instant impact to the site. And these are usually mounted on a truck, and it's a giant apparatus, a digging machine that digs whole mature trees off of a site and allows you to transport them and then move them to another location.
And I know, let me just say my own personal experience, I've seen that happen a lot in Harris County generally. You know, I live near Terry Hershey Park on Buffalo Bio, and there's an area that I regularly run. And one day there were just 6 magnolia trees. I mean, big 20 feet magnolia trees just showed up in the section. Yeah. And I knew that had to be a spade situation,
right?
For sure. And I also know that in the building of Discovery Green, they moved a lot of large trees to that location so that there were already mature trees, which was great. So that, you know, Discovery Green is so beautiful and shaded. A lot of it's because of spade trees that were put there. Anyway, well, thank you. So what is the biggest challenge you face to establishing trees in the riparian area?
I would say the biggest challenge is probably dealing with the different soil types that we have in Harris County. Not only that, the different soil types that you have between the northern part of Harris County and the southern part of Harris County, we're also left with different soil profiles post-construction. A lot of times we're left with limited topsoil on a site post-construction. And so getting any vegetation established on a site that doesn't have topsoil or has limited topsoil is difficult. So establishing trees, as you might imagine, is also a difficult process with the soil types that we have to deal with. So we've kind of come up with a maintenance program, a 2-year establishment period that's worked well with us on a lot of sites. Over time, after you get grass established on the site and trees on the site for a few years, you start to get a buildup again of organic matter in the soil, organic layer there. You get nutrient cycling, and trees start to grow better after that point. So that initial establishment, though, is difficult, and it varies based on what part of the county you're in. Some parts of the county are more difficult post-construction than others. Another thing is just we're kind of, even though we do have a maintenance program, we're a bit at the mercy of Mother Nature when it comes to rainfall and extreme weather events and conditions as well.
Well, are we? Yeah, are we all?
Yeah.
That is true. Although we've been getting a lot of rain lately, so that's good for the trees.
It's been really nice. Yeah, we've benefited from that for the last several years now.
Yeah.
Post that 2011 drought, it's thankfully been relatively consistent rain. Sometimes too much, but mostly enough for our trees.
Right. So how do you identify areas to plant?
What we do is we look for sites that are in our program that are channels or detention basins that are at their ultimate configuration first. And so these are sites that are not going to be expanded further, that are stable as well. There isn't any pending construction or repair work on the site, so that we can get in there first of all and plant trees and not have to worry so much about the site getting disturbed again, about there being future expansion if we're talking about a detention basin, or if there's a repair project, our trees getting sacrificed for those construction repairs. Secondly, we look at the amount of right-of-way that we have on a site. We always make sure that we have enough right-of-way to plant and maintain the trees. So that means that we need to be able to access the site with vehicles, because we do water the trees for a 2-year period. So we need to be able to get into the site, access it to maintain the trees as well. We also look at distributing our planting across Harris County. So we look at all parts of Harris County, so we're not focused on primarily one watershed over another. We try to spread that out evenly. And then a lot of times our projects are generated post construction based on permitting requirements. So we might have larger sites with the bond program. We're getting a lot of larger detention basin and construction projects completed.
Nice.
And as those come through, the tree planting, there's kind of the last phase, the last step to be done there. And so as those come up, we complete those as well. And those are essentially, those are selected for us for tree planting.
Well, that's exciting. So you sometimes literally get orders from other parts of flood control district. We now need trees.
Yeah, right. And then usually we
That's
have some lead time on that, and we'll know when a really big project is coming through, and we can dedicate our resources to that, those projects as they become completed.
That's great. Note from Matt Stallman. I'll just give a shout out to him. He's a Houston Wilderness Board member. He said, great video, Nick. He's curious if there are any detention basins or types of basins where flood control district specifically would not want to plant trees in a basin bottom.
Those areas specifically, like I mentioned before, if it's an area where the basin potentially could get dug out further or deepened or enlarged in some way. So that would be the primary consideration. And then secondary, in addition to that, is we want to make sure we have access to all areas of the basin. But we plant between small developer type basins that the flood control district has been deeded, that used to be attached to neighborhoods that maybe mitigate for street runoff, smaller basin projects that are 2 acres or less that we plant, and we all go all the way up to 90-acre regional detention basins that we plant. So size really isn't a consideration for us. It's really that making sure that the site's in its ultimate configuration and that there isn't any scheduled repair or modification to it.
How about soil amendments, fertilizers? Kelly Andrasik was asking that at the city of Houston.
Yeah.
Have you found that it's more difficult to get trees established in the bottom detention areas, and do you have soil amendments?
Yeah, we do soil amending on limited circumstances. We do composting and tilling in compost on certain sites, and I've had good results with that. We also, for all of our plantings, we mulch the trees during that 2-year period as well to just try to build up that organic material. We also use a biologically based fertilizer, a liquid water soluble fertilizer that helps to encourage soil microbial activity as well. The one biggest limiting factor is probably the expense and cost of amending the soil. Although it's
Right.
really effective, it is expensive. And when we do that kind of work in detention basins, we need to make sure that we kind of understand the pattern of the water flow in and out of the basin, because when you amend that soil, it's kind of loosening it up, and you have that lighter material, that organic material that could migrate off site, off the area that you're intending to use it. So we do use it on a limited basis, but it is where we have used it has been successful.
That's great. You've kind of covered this, but what do you consider to be a riparian area? Is it bios, creeks, detention basins, parks? Is it kind of
Yeah.
what is that?
So the general definition would be any area along a flowing water system or near water. So that includes pretty much every property that Harris County Flood Control District manages and maintains. So yes, you're correct. It's creeks, it's bayous, it's detention basins. Most of our detention basins that are constructed now have a water quality element to them. So there's usually a water feature in the bottom, wetland features in the bottom as well. So they include riparian areas in detention basins as well.
Would the trees survive if they're underwater, flooded for a long period of time? We can all think of examples of that.
Sure. Yeah. And we've actually had pretty good success with that. In our detention basins, that's a question that comes up pretty often, is how long can these trees stay submerged? And we might have periods of time where a detention basin would have water in it for a week, maybe 10 days. More often than not, that water is designed to be stored and then drain off. And so it's usually a week or less that we have a detention basin that's full. So we've found that even planting sort of your mesic or even more of your dry or upland species in the detention basin itself, they survive pretty well with that. Where we've had trouble is specific areas along tow lines that we've planted, where I'm thinking specifically Buffalo Bayou, where we've tried to establish some trees along the tow line, and that the flow of buffalo is affected by the reservoirs. And so if the reservoirs are releasing, that water stays up not for 1 week or 2 weeks, it could stay up for 3, 4, 6 weeks at a time. And that ends up smothering the trees in that area. So that is where it's the most difficult. But under normal planting conditions, we don't really have any issue with that.
What have you found to be the most, what has surprised you the most about planting trees as part of the whole flood control district project, nature-based infrastructure process?
I guess the biggest surprise I would have is that under the right circumstances and given the right maintenance, it doesn't take much for these trees to get established, and they can grow very quickly once you do have them established. So if we have the right soil conditions within our maintenance program, where we're taking care of the trees and we get just enough adequate rainfall, we can really establish them on site quickly. And just the short amount of time that we're reaching that canopy closure stage, it's usually 10 to 15 years we're at that point on a site. So that was surprising that we could establish forest canopy in a short amount of time like that.
Yeah, I don't know for sure. You as a forester and others on this call would know better than me, but I would think we're a little bit of the envy of other regions, because our trees just, once they start to get established, they establish fast.
Yeah.
So really, that is
it's a regional thing. Yeah, it's really something that we can enjoy here that's a lot more difficult in a lot of other parts of Texas.
Places. Yeah, which is why we're going to make 4.6 million trees.
Yeah.
Have you noticed much mortality or damage from the freeze this past winter?
In most of our plantings, no. We noticed it in a few specific species. Wax myrtle in particular had some dieback on those. That's a understory shrub that we plant. Where I noticed it more was in mature trees and larger trees, or trees that had some sort of stress already. I haven't really seen it at all in any of our young plantings, but on some of our forested channels where maybe there was some older mature trees that leafed out early. That was a big hit to them, but not in general over our planting locations.
That's good. Well, we've got several related to kind of species and stress. So let me get to those.
Sure.
How is Flood Control District managing invasives such as the old Chinese tallow that drives us all crazy?
Right.
And I added that comment. It's not in this question. Are you removing these as you plan your plantings?
Yeah, so most of our sites where we have a detention basin, we're starting with grasses on the site that we've planted out there. So we don't have to usually have that competition control within our tree planting sites. Where we do have those invasive species are on our forested channels and channels that are in another program that the Flood Control District engages in, and that's our Selective Clearing program. So that's where we go through a section of forested channel, remove invasive species where we can, and remove trees that are leaning or down trees in the channel, trees that could block the flow, and also thinning areas where maybe the undergrowth or understory vegetation is too thick that it could inhibit water flow. So during those operations are when we're controlling Chinese tallow, and that's cutting the tree and then herbiciding the stump. So it's an ongoing battle, but it's less in my program and more in our selective clearing and management of our already forested channels in the region. Got
it. Well, and so that kind of leads into a somewhat similar question, not necessarily about invasives, but just generally. Does Flood Control District have situations where they have to cut down trees? And if so, what are those situations? And is there opportunity to then reforest and when that happens?
So we do have to cut down trees from time to time. Trees along our right of way, we have a lot of right of way that's adjacent to private property and neighborhoods. And so if there's a tree that's on our property that's near private property that's died or it's been damaged in some way, we have to remove those trees to prevent that from falling ahead of time. We also have trees along our forested channels, sometimes with our sandier soils after a big flood event that might be undermined, that have to be removed because they're no longer stable on the site. We also have to remove trees as part of our construction projects. So if we're expanding an area, we might have to remove trees in forested areas to expand a detention basin or widen a channel. And while we don't like to do that, we always take a look at that ahead of time to see where we can work around those areas, leave pockets, leave buffers of trees, and then ultimately, if the community values it in that area, we'll go back in and replant where we can on those projects.
In those areas. Well, and some folks have asked generally about location. I love that. There's real interest in flood control district planting trees, which is great, and in different areas. How about areas that generally have more concrete than other areas? So the question is, does Harris County Flood Control District have a strong influence on planting trees in more urban zones that are more prone to flooding and due to excess concrete coverage?
Right. Yeah, that is definitely something we've looked into, and I've talked with the Water Resources Forester with Texas A&M Forest Service about this, and kind of looking at some of that land cover and land usage, and using that to help model and help be a factor that we look at when we're determining where we're going to plant trees. Now, obviously, we want to plant the trees where we're going to get the most benefit. And if we have an urbanized area that's got a lot of concrete, a lot of runoff, and put trees out there, that's definitely areas that we want to try to target. We haven't specifically got a program looking at that yet, but we are looking into it and seeing what we can do. The one challenge that we do have is in the more urbanized areas, you're usually dealing with limited right of way. So our channels are usually hemmed in and they're narrower, especially in the backsides of neighborhoods. So it's more difficult for us to get in there and do a planting, but where we can, we definitely do. We definitely try to get all across the county and get into those areas as well.
Well, in a similar vein, there's a question about in situations where the Corps of Engineers is also involved in, in aspects of the corridors, more specifically white oak and braze. Are there more opportunities to allow trees to be planted along some of those areas that tend to be bare, but seems like they could look like buffalo bio, but they just really aren't right now?
Yeah, so there's some different things with those channels in particular. They're federal channels, and in particular on braze, we're limited as to what we can plant on the slope, depending on the location along Braze Bayou, because there's been modeling that's been done on the flows and engineering, as you know, all of the work on Project Braze, all of that widening of the channel there has been studied, all of the bridge replacements that have gone on along there have been studied, and there's been studies on the flow and everything to do with that, a lot of heavy engineering stuff going on there. So if the site has been modeled a certain way and needs to meet a certain flow, then sometimes we're limited and unable to plant on the slopes of those channels. And so turning it into something that was more similar to Buffalo Bayou is not something we can do. And it might be due to federal regulations as well as to what they're trying to achieve on those channels. But it does leave the top open for planting, and we do have partners and we do have other organizations that maintain the tops along those channels, especially, and we try to leave that open for planting whenever we can as well.
Okay. How about somebody has asked, how do you define a preferred tree density? And when you answer that, you might also, because I've got another question about whether or not you have a preferred tree list. So you might combine those together.
Okay. So take the second question first. We don't have a preferred tree list, but we do have a pretty broad palette of trees that we do use. We've planted in years past over 50 different species of trees. They're all native species of Southeast Texas, and we have about 20 or so that we use more frequently. And these are trees that are easier to source. They establish quickly on the site. They are adaptable to a lot of the site conditions across Harris County. We also, every single year, have an inventory program where we use interns to go out and inventory a portion of those sites that we've planted in years past, and we calculate mortality on that. And we look for trends across Harris County, what does well, what doesn't do well. And that's kind of where we've gotten our list, official, unofficial list of our trees that we use more commonly. And they're common species that everyone knows: Loblolly pine, bald cypress, water oak, sycamore, green ash, several of the others. Most of them, there's 100% overlap with the super trees and the benefits that we have there. Yeah.
You've got a lot of high ecosystem services benefits from the tree species that you're picking, which is great.
Can you repeat the first part of the question so I get
that? It had to do with preferred tree density.
Okay, so with that, it's another thing that as we've done inventories in the past, we kind of know where our expected mortality rates are. And so our density at planting usually varies between 200 to 300 trees per acre, which is about a 12 to 15 foot spacing. And given the mortalities that we experience, we found that that's a good density to handle the mortality without having to replant a site, but at the same time reaching canopy closure in a reasonable amount of time. Our target for ultimate density is around 80 to 100 trees per acre. So we're planning in that there's going to be mortality on the site, especially within the first couple of years of establishment, and then just over time. And then that 80 to 100 trees per acre gets us at canopy closure, given the growth rates that we've experienced in Harris County. We get that in 12 to 15 years.
That's great. So that I've had several questions on grasses, and I'm going to get to those, but let me get a couple others related to trees, and then we'll hit some of these in grasses. Do you ever conduct organic soil treatments such as peat plus worms, etc.? You mentioned a little bit about compost. You might go a little bit into more detail on, where you get your compost, how you do that, and then
Sure.
do rain and general erosion complicate that process?
Yeah, so we do use compost. That's been kind of our go-to, and we have some specifications on the type of compost that has to be provided on the site. It's got to meet I think it's the seal-tested Compost Council of America or whatever it happens to be. But this is it's got to meet a certain list of criteria for compost and the size of the material and everything that we do. And so that's kind of what we've mainly used. And like I said, it's something that we do on a very limited basis just because of costs and incorporating that into the soil. So we're always looking for, more efficient and more effective ways. If we could do that on every single site, we would definitely pursue that. But it's something that we look at doing. And I really like to use, when we are going to do that, doing actual compost and not a compost tea, something that actually adds organic matter to the soil. And the fertilizer that we use, being a biologically based fertilizer, it's got components in it and carbohydrates in it that are put in there to help feed that soil microbiology as the trees are growing up. So.
Well, and you can tell in the video that the trees are happy. They're looking good. So that the soil's doing something right.
Yeah, we find that they reach a certain point, and then you get nutrient cycling occurring naturally on the site as leaves drop, they decompose. It builds that organic layer of organic matter in the soil, and so as years go on, the trees get healthier. Whereas they might have a hard time the first few years after planting just because of the site conditions we have.
Right. Well, and for those listening, particularly interested in soil, when we do the video forum with TxDOT, they're going to particularly concentrate on how they prep their very harsh soil conditions to make the freeways look as absolutely amazing with deforestation, just like Flood Control District does. We'll go into more detail on that. So look out for that forum. It'll be coming up in the next few months. And that one will be a deeper dive into the soil prep as well. Well, let's talk a little bit about grasses. We've got several questions on that. Can you speak more on native grass seedings, and then also just generally mention how soon after trees are planted do grasses and flowers come in? It's touched on a little bit in the video, but if you want to go into a little more detail.
Okay. Yeah, so our primary objective post-construction on the site is site stabilization. So what we do is make sure that the site has some sort of vegetative cover, and that's usually regulatory, that we have to have some sort of minimum cover on the site so as to reduce or prevent erosion on the site. So we seed with a mix of seeds based on cool season or warm season just to get the site covered. A different operation would be using native grasses. That's usually something that's done after we get the site stabilized, and also planting of wildflowers, and that's done either in conjunction with that site stabilization or just after the fact there. So I'm not probably the best person to answer those questions. We do have an agronomist on staff who's over our whole program, including native grass and wildflower plantings, that maybe we could get him on a forum at another time here to give a better answer than I could.
That's a great idea, and I think we may very well look at doing that, because of course we live amongst trees and grasses together, and how do they work together, and how do we encourage more of the native plantings on both sides of that issue are important. So I think that's a good idea. We'll look at doing that. Do other agencies need to report numbers of trees being planted to add to the 4.6 million goal? Let me mention right there that after the Q&A, I'll talk a little bit more about what the Tree Strategy Implementation Group is doing in terms of its 4-part objective to help the City of Houston achieve that goal. But the answer is yes, you can report those numbers, but that website, to my knowledge, is not quite ready with the City of Houston. So, but I'll talk a little bit about more about that at the end of the Q&A. That's a good question, though. And we do want everyone to be able to report their numbers. We do have some numbers because of the Tree Strategy Implementation Group's data collection within our all those organizations that do big plantings, but those are not recorded somewhere where people can see them yet. And then also, good question, is the mortality history and planting preferences you described published in some way so the public can use the information, particularly with climate change, knowing what is working well over time can be helpful. And I will mention some things after Q&A on that, but you might want to mention some things, Nick.
Yeah, we don't actually have that published. It's kind of in our internal records, but that's a good point.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about that after the Q&A. Can citizens plant native trees along the bios themselves?
So the short answer is yes, but there's some steps that need to be taken first. Number one is if you're planning on Harris County flood control right of way, the county needs to know about it. So there's an approval process for that. And so you would just need to have a simple planting plan. If it's an area behind your house, we need to check and make sure what our ownership rights are on that. And then we also need to go through that same process that we do internally when we're identifying tree planting sites. And that's making sure that the site is in a future construction plan, that in the next couple of years it might get widened or changed or modified in some way. We got to verify the location of the planting of the trees just to make sure that they're not interfering in any way with any flood control structures out on site. Our channels have what is known as a backslope swale system in most cases, and it's kind of a channel that runs along the top of the channel that drains storm water away from flowing down the slope of the channel and creating more erosion, and funnels it into certain areas. So those areas we keep open and out of planting. And then we also have maintenance access roads along the top of channels that we keep open for maintenance, and just as if there needs to be access for repairs to be done. So once all of that is approved, then we can give the okay. The other thing that we like to know, if it's a 1 or a 2 tree project, or if it's a 40 or 50 tree project, it's if there's going to be maintenance of the trees on the site. So sometimes with outside groups, we partner with them and allow them to plant on our site. And they agree to maintain the trees as well. So what we want to make sure happens is that anything that gets planted, there's a plan for it, it gets taken care of, and that it's got some chance of survival and longevity on the site.
That's great. And if they want to, if people are interested in that, they contact you.
They would contact our main number and
they'll
be
direct
routed
them
through probably our property management department. So contact the Harris County Flood Control District's main line, and they'll direct you to the right people, and then eventually it will come to me.
Oh, okay, great. Have you ever calculated the benefits of your plantings, what they provide?
Yeah, we've run some models and some calculations using the iTree suite of software in the past, just looking at avoided stormwater runoff primarily. And so we have looked at that, and we're actually looking at taking some detailed measurements on a few of our sites that have achieved that canopy closure stage, taking those measurements and seeing what the benefit is across that site, and projecting that out across all of our planting areas. So we planted over 1,200 acres of forest across Harris County. And so they're all in various states of development there. And so we want to be able to project out that. So it's something we're working on, something we've done in the past, but want to try to get a little better information and detail.
Oh, good. I look forward. I look forward to hearing more about what all that is. So that's great. I have kind of another soil question. I love all these soil questions. Do you have any estimation on how long it takes for nutrient cycle to really start taking over when you're, working on your soil prep for your tree plantings?
Right. So I don't have any hard data, just anecdotal observations. I've noticed on sites that we've tried to plant immediately after the construction of the site, or right after we've gotten some sort of turf on the site, that it's usually a few years that the trees, they'll struggle for a while. And so it takes a few years, but I've also noticed on sites that we haven't gotten to right away that maybe have been mowed for 3 or 4 years before we get out there and plant trees, that those trees tend to do a lot better. So it,
So
even
the
if,
grass
yeah,
has served a good purpose, I guess.
right, yeah, the grass and that decomposition there. I mean, it's not in some cases ultimately what we want on the site. It might not be the initial the ultimate plan for the site to just have grass there. It would be ultimately to have trees on a lot of portions of it, but it does tend to take a few years to get there. But I mean, really, soil building takes decades and decades to occur. But we do see that if the site isn't completely depleted, that within a few years, trees aren't experiencing nutrient deficiencies and other things.
That's great. That's probably why you didn't have too much of an impact from the freeze, too.
Right. Yeah.
Right. That's great. Well, all right. So one last question, then we're going to talk a little bit about the next steps for the tree strategy implementation group. And this is kind of a fun question. Let's see. Oh, wait. One quick additional question has come in before I ask you this other one here, which is a nice closer. What is your opinion on the best mulch types for riparian areas, pine needles versus shredded wood chips?
Okay. So we use shredded hardwood mulch. It tends to work well. I think pine needles are awesome. I think they're probably the best mulch. And if we could use pine needles on our side, I probably would pick that. I like that it acidifies the soil, which is a benefit to a lot of the species that we have. And another thing that you might think that we experience a lot of it and that we don't is that mulch moving off site. So we try to target our plantings on the channels on the upper portions of the slope. So just our normal heavy rain days or normal medium to high water events aren't washing away the soil every single time it rains. They're washing away that mulch. But if I had a preference, I would say that pine needles are great, and anything that's been composted or broken down for a couple years, it's a little farther along in the decomposition process is better. But we use shredded hardwood mulch
most of the time. Okay, well, that's great. All right, so last question. If you could be a tree, what tree would you be?
Yeah,
great question.
Classic. I recently had the opportunity to travel to a place that actually has sugar maple trees, part of the country that produces maple syrup. And, after tasting fresh made local maple syrup, I'm going to go with a sugar maple tree. I think they're great. That
would be a hard thing for me. I would want to be all 14 super trees at one time.
Yeah. So. Oh, that's great. Yeah.
But that's a good one. That's a good one. It's too bad we can't have that one here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nick. This has been fabulous. Thanks to everybody for calling in. What a great big group today. Very exciting. All the forums have been very well attended. We really appreciate it. As I mentioned, look out for 3 more that will take place between now and the end of September. The Tree Strategy Implementation Group, or TSIG as we call it, is putting together and is very close to being finished with a large-scale tree planting manual that will provide a lot of the things you all asked about today. There will be a section on soil prep. There'll be a section on stressors for trees and how to deal with those. There'll be just pretty much everything you want to know about large-scale tree planting and how to do it, where to do it, why to do it. And it includes information on tree species and where you can find additional resources. It's chock full of really cool appendices of information, and then also lots of references on how to find things. So we'll be the TSIG group has got probably another meeting or 2 to finish that manual, and then we'll be providing it to the general public. The video forums are meant to overlap with that manual, and so they are referenced in the manual as well, so that people can see things, on-site views of things as well as written resource information. So I wanted to let you all know about that. And again, if you want to see this video, will be posted along with all the other prior video forums on the Houston Wilderness website under programs and 4.6 million trees. And then lastly, I want to mention that the city of Houston will be housing a web page where people can input their plantings, so that we can start having that calculator or count, if you will, of the 4.6 million, where the city started keeping that count, the resilience office, in 2019. So in their report, their first year report this past January, it does talk about how much have been planted to date. And but we got a long way to go. And so we want to be able to count everybody that wants to be involved and who plants a tree between now and 2030 in the Houston region. So look out for that. We'll be advertising when that City of Houston webpage is available for people to go and be able to put that information about their trees on there. Thank you again, Nick, very much for your time and all your fabulous information. There was a lot of interest in this topic, as I knew there likely would be. You've gotten a lot of nice comments of thank you from a lot of folks who have been listening. Feel free to reach out to myself, Deborah January Beavers, or Nick if you have additional follow-up questions that you would like to know about. And we look forward to seeing you all at the next forum. Thanks so much, Nick.
Thanks, Deborah. I really enjoyed it.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.